Does It Chapter 2 effectively portray childhood trauma? Today we're going to explore the cycle of trauma, specifically intergenerational trauma. Then we're going to look at repressed memories and the difference between repression and suppression. And then we're going to wrap it up with this concept of shared trauma and how it can be a social glue to bind a group together. I'm Jonathan Hetterly, a licensed professional counselor, and this is Psych Cinema. Psych Cinema is the video series where I explore the psychology found in the films and television I watch and love, or in this case, that I watch. Because if you check out my review of It Chapter 2, you'll recognize that I was not particularly favorable on the film. But having read the book, seen the miniseries, and now seen both of the recent films, I really wanted to do a Psych Cinema episode because I think that this film could have been so much more. There's a lot of deep psychological principles found in this. So let's dive right into it. But beforehand, spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil the film in a number of ways. If you haven't read the book, seen the miniseries, or seen the film yet, just be warned. Go see it, then come back. Also check out my review, see if you had some of the same issues that I had with the film. So in the new film, we see specifically with the characters of Bev and Eddie, the cycle of trauma, that intergenerational trauma of their childhood trauma. When we look at Bev, she was sexually molested and physically abused by her father. And now we see present day grown-up Bev, and she is in a marriage with a violent husband. And then you see Eddie, if you recall, as a child, he was a hypochondriac, he had a codependent mom, made him take all these prescriptions. And now as a grown-up, he has married basically a spitting image of someone like his mother. And so we want to explore, why do some people, when they go through trauma or dysfunction when they're young, how come some people are able to sort of deviate and leave that behind, but maybe in the case of Bev and Eddie, the pattern in the cycle repeats? Well, there's a number of reasons if we think about that. First and foremost is that those types of dysfunctional or abusive or traumatic relationships, it feels familiar. So the feelings are the same in terms of, it could even be where they mistake intensity for pleasure. In the case of Bev and being in an abusive relationship, that intensity that she associates with her father, she may kind of confuse that with arousal and pleasure because, again, we learn what love is through our family of origin, through our primary caregivers. And if hers was abusive towards her, why would she think that that was anything less than normal? Because a lot of times, dysfunctional and traumatic and abusive family life, it's normative. That's all they know. And so when they find it as adults, it feels familiar. They may also, again, they may be really worn down with Beverly or Eddie to where they feel that that's what love accompanies, that they don't know any other type of love other than abusive or codependent type of love. And in reality, when you think about Eddie, when you think about Bev, that's all they want, is they want to be loved. And if they feel insecure, if they feel embarrassment, if they feel guilt, they're going to look for it wherever they can find it. And even if that is back in the hands of someone else that creates just as much dysfunction and inflicts just as much pain on them, you can see how that cycle of trauma, that intergenerational trauma, continues to happen, even though they might look back on their childhood and say it was horrible and unhappy. In the present day, as adults, they're kind of replicating that. So then, now that we looked at the cycle of trauma, let's look at this idea of repressed memories, because that's a huge thing in It Chapter 2. Because when Mike, the character that stayed in Derry, reaches out to the rest of the Losers Club as adults, most of them don't remember anything about their childhood or what happened to Derry when they faced off against Pennywise. And it's only once they return to Derry, their childhood hometown, it's only when Mike again kind of informs them of what's happened, do they really unlock all of these memories, this pain, this trauma that had really been locked away in their subconscious. And that's a huge thing about why once they go back to Derry, that they can't leave. Richie, the character played by Bill Hader, says, well, let's just leave. Forget about this. And Bev, played by Jessica Chastain, says, we can't. She's seen the future, and they will all die if they don't face this. And that's a really creative way, a twist on the difference between repression and suppression. Repression is unconscious. It's really, in a lot of ways, how the Losers Club as adults, they're still impacted by the events of their childhood, but they don't remember specific memories or events. But once it comes back to them, once they return home, in Bill Hader's case, in Richie's case, he wants to leave it behind, and that's really suppression. That's avoidance. That's a conscious decision to avoid the pain, to avoid the memory, to avoid what it really stirs up within them. And Bev confronts him and says they can't do that. And so that's really one of the delicate things about working with victims of trauma in psychotherapy is understanding the difference between repression, that they're not even fully aware of their trauma, and then suppression is really, once they're able to identify it, this desire to actively avoid it at any cost. So the film does a great job of exploring this childhood trauma and how it's been locked away over time, but once it's opened, life can't go on as normal. Things just can't be the same. And that really shifts us then to this final principle of shared trauma, because the children in Derry, they really came together as the Losers Club because they both had individual traumas, whether it be Bev and her father, whether it be Mike and losing his parents in a fire, whether it be Bill and his brother being viciously murdered, whether it be Stan being a Jewish kid in the original story took place in the 50s of really being marginalized in that way, or whether it be also Bev just kind of having a promiscuous reputation, whether it be Ben being the fat kid. They all kind of had these individual traumas that brought them together as a cohesive unit. And so even their friendship was formed by that social glue of being outsiders, outcasts. But then once they faced Pennywise, and once they came back as adults, that shared trauma of battling and defeating him also came together, that brought group cohesion, which is really at the heart of the second film, is that them recapturing that cohesion and that bond from the trauma that they experienced facing off against that entity of evil in Pennywise the Clown. So you have the cycle of abuse and trauma that's shown through certain characters like Bev and Eddie. You have repression of memories and then suppression of memories in terms of how they reconnect to their childhood by going back to their hometown. And then finally, you have shared trauma. That's what brought them together as a group of friends, and it's the only way that they're really going to be able to defeat the evil of Pennywise in the present-day Derry. And so, I don't think the film does as good of a job capturing this, but the seeds of trauma is there in the film. But what do you think? Do you think the film does a better portrayal of the depths of trauma, of childhood trauma, and how it continues to wreak havoc on adults? Or are you like me, that the seeds or the threads are there, but it's really kind of overshadowed by a lot of the shock jump scares of the film? Be sure to leave your comments below, and you're also welcome, in fact, you're recommended to leave me a film or a TV series you'd like for me to dissect here on Psych Cinema. Be sure to check out shrinktank.com, our website, where you're going to find all types of articles, videos, podcasts, and more that explore the rich intersection of psychology and pop culture. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Psych Cinema. Thanks for watching. I'm Jonathan Hetterly. Until next time, I'll see you at the movies.